The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "You have heard that it was those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a sibling, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a sibling, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your sibling has said something against you, leave the gift there before the altar and go first to be reconciled to your sibling. And then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown in prison. For truly I tell you, you will never go out until you have paid your last penny." Jesus also said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go to hell." It was also said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said, 'To those of ancient of times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes. No, no. Anything more? Well, anything more than this comes from the evil one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise
Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So I'm told that there is some kind of big game later today. And I'm not quite sure what it is. Football is not my thing, but I hear people are going to throw around a pigskin and watch commercials. And then I hear later this week, then we're going to have this thing called Valentine's Day, kind of a Hallmark holiday that we can spend more on roses. And I have to say, as I'm thinking about all the things that I keep hearing about, it doesn't seem like today's gospel reading is really pairing well with the chips and the wings and the chocolates that are to come in the next few days. I have to remind myself as I was reading this long gospel reading that this is a gospel that is a continuation from last week when Jesus began his sermon on the... Now, the setting and the audience, well, both of these things are really key for us to understand how we are supposed to receive this kind of lengthy diatribe that Jesus is teaching about today. Now, you might know that scholars have said that Matthew's gospel was probably likely written for a Jewish community. It was written for religious insiders who are debating the identity of Jesus. Some are saying that he is the promised Messiah, and others are saying he's a delusional heretic. And so today's text puts Jesus on a mountain to speak about the law. And the law that he's talking about is, well, the one where Moses received on Mount Sinai, pictured in our stained glass window here. And Matthew's going to go on to argue that Jesus is actually the new Moses who reinterprets the law. And this reinterpretation is to better reveal God's vision for the world. Now, if you were here last week, or even if you were, let me remind you how last week's gospel ended. Because it ended with how Jesus is going to reinterpret the law, and that makes the difference in how we understand today's text. So this is what Jesus said. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now here's a little secret. In Matthew's gospel, the word righteousness or righteous is a big deal. Righteousness is linked to justice and ethics and Torah observance. That is, observing the commandments of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament. Now, here's the real kicker, though. The Pharisees that Jesus mentioned, well, the Pharisees are Jewish individuals who looked at the Torah with a literalistic interpretation. So what they did is, well, they tried to follow the Torah in a manner that was accurate to the written word. But it didn't always align with the broader intent of the written word. It's one of those classic examples of following the letter of the law while not really grasping the spirit of the law. And so that's where Jesus is entering into today's text. And so what Jesus does is he's trying to say that the righteousness that is prescribed in the text, well, what we are called to do is to amplify it. It's actually not making it easier. It's doing something, even making it more difficult for us. So the way that Jesus goes about doing this is he gives 4 examples. The first reflected on the command to not kill. Now, I think that if I were probably to take a poll here, and I won't have anyone raise hands because it'll just make me feel a little unsettled, but if I were to ask you if you thought that killing someone or murdering someone was bad or not good for humanity, I think most of us would probably raise our hands, right? And that's why Jesus picked this one first, because he thought that the Pharisees and scribes and those gathered around were probably going to be in agreement with him. And so killing and murder, he's like, these are bad. We can agree to that. But remember, Jesus said to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. So we need to bring the intent and the literal words into better alignment. And to do that is to understand the simple moral fact that words can kill. For anger and insults and mischaracterizations can affect death on our neighbors, whether intended or not. It's the casualty that is caused by our privilege and our power. It's the slow erosion of the psyche of another because of social media. It's the way that murder is committed in ways that don't even look physical. And so Jesus is trying to say, yes, murder physically, not good, but also murder goes beyond that. It's an expansion of what has been taught. And so once Jesus brings up this first example, well, then he took on kind of a little bit more of a controversial, or dare I say, political topic of the day. One that was very divisive. That was regarding divorce and adultery. So what you need to know, so that you understand what's going on here, is that two of the most well-known rabbis of Jesus' time, Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai, well, they were famously divided over the issue of divorce. Now, Dr. Melanie Howard states it like this. Hillel's school of thought favored a more permissive approach to divorce that allowed for divorce even in the case that a wife had ruined her husband's meal. Wow. On the other hand, the school of Shammai, well, uphold a more stricter view that only permitted divorce in the most extreme cases. Now, what we also have to remember is that in Jesus' time, marriage was not a formal recognition of love between two people who desire to spend their lives together. Rather, the primary purpose of marriage in Jesus' time was almost the purchase or the owning of a woman to create a household, which was then seen as the fundamental economic unit and the way to preserve the family. And as time goes on, and later in Matthew's gospel, Jesus asked point blank about divorce. But here, what Jesus is trying to say is that the importance of this relationship between this woman, who at that time was seen as property, and this man, well, that relationship should not be severed by divorce and used as a cover for selfishness and at the whims, say, a bad meal, while pretending all the while that this is legal and it makes everything right. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, I got like 2 head shakes. So let me go back. We'll rewind. Don't think about the chips and the salsa. Let the chocolates be. We're over halfway through the sermon. Let's stick with it. We've got this. This is going to do something for us in our lives. Okay, so what Jesus is trying to say here is that you can't just say, well, I had a bad meal, so now I'm going to divorce you, but it's okay because the law says that it is okay for me to divorce you as long as I fill out this paperwork, and I'm going to let you go. What Jesus is saying is that is not good enough. That is not morally upright. That, in fact, is not holding on to the relationship of two people. Jesus here is reminding us that understanding and love, well, they must be a part of that process of divorce. And this was a big deal in the society of that time because remember, we said that women were seen as property. And so Jesus is saying here that simply following the letter of the law does not mask the moral failure of lacking to treat the other as someone who is made in God's image. Does that make sense? Okay, I've got like 7 now, so I'm going to take that as a double of where we started, but still a lot of confusion. It'll be online later today. We'll thank Charlie for editing that, and then you can go back and review what I said there, if you care. But let's move on to that final example. We've been through 3 out of the 4 now. So the 4th example Jesus gave was about empty promises. Now, the Message, which isn't my favorite translation, but can be really helpful here, the Message summarizes it with the intensity that Jesus spoke all of this with. It's meant to cut at our ego. And so this is how they say and summarize what Jesus was speaking. And don't say anything you don't mean. This counsel is embedded deep in our tradition. For you only make things worse when you lay down a smokescreen of pious talk saying, I will pray for you, and never doing it. Or saying, God be with you, and not meaning it. You don't make your words true by embellishing them with religious lace. You see, in making your speech sound more religious, well, it becomes less true. So just say yes and no. For when you manipulate your words to get your own way, you go wrong. You see, this false sense of righteousness made Jesus so upset in Matthew's gospel. And it'll happen again and again. For what Jesus revealed is that the intent of the law is to bring about human flourishing. Or to put it another way, as Reverend Dr. Matthew, Jesus desired to rescue the law from religious people who misuse the law as a source of oppression or self-promotion. Jesus got angry about practicing righteousness in public and about using religion to increase status. Jesus was angry about religion that did not bring about liberation and life. So throughout today's gospel, Jesus took written commands and revealed how they're all about forming a community of love and belonging and compassion. And it makes me kind of wonder, if I were to look at myself in the mirror, how often do we, you and I, we as religious people, do the exact opposite of this intention? I mean, how often, when we talk about faith, do we make it about me and my personal faith and what I need to get out of it, instead of focusing on the we that Jesus is talking about here? Or how about when we take our faith and we try to make it into some kind of product that we can buy or purchase, some kind of exchange of goods? Or how about when we talk about the church as being about what I want instead of what is best for the community and what is true to God's vision? You see, what Jesus is saying today is that it's less about me and it's more about we. That is exactly what we've heard for thousands of years, beyond Jesus. For in Deuteronomy, we hear Moses speak. And Moses was speaking and reminding us that the law, which are those commandments given by God, well, the law is not a negative thing, but in fact, the law is intended to create life. For it is the structure that brings life. The law is interpreted in a loving lens as pure gift. So if you're back to thinking about the big game later today, come back to me, because this next part is really important. God's intention is to bring an abundance of life, rooted in liberation and love. Anything else that anyone tries to tell you is nothing short of a lie and not the reality of Christ's message. I'll say it again. God's intention is to bring an abundance of life rooted in liberation and love. And just moments ago, we got the best example for what makes that true. For as we witnessed in the promise of baptism, in that moment, we saw that Rex and Agatha, they are loved by God forever without exception. For in our baptisms, we are promised that we are loved. We are created in God's image, each and every one of us. And that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from God's love. Hard stop. That is the truth. And that, my friends, That is the expanding and the widening and the life-giving promise that Jesus is hammering home to those gathered around that mountain today. And so, with that in mind, we try our best here at Wicker Park, although we fail, we try our best to take seriously what Jesus is teaching. That's why we focus on welcoming those of diverse races and gender identities and countries of birth. It's why we offer our support to Lutheran response to assist in those recovering in Syria and Turkey. And that's why we take seriously the work to move this building into a state that can better welcome people of diverse abilities. And that's what today's gospel is all about. So I'm going to leave us here, because we want to get on to chips and salsa and then maybe some chocolate later. But the gift of all of that, the gift of today's gospel, is that Jesus has invited us to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. Looks like that invitation is to prioritize justice and love above any of the words written on a page. So for us here, we can be free to fully love. We can live abundantly. We can follow God's vision to live in beloved community, this day and always. Thanks be to God for this gift. Amen.